Our story begins in the Riverlands. Robb Stark has just liberated River Run and captured Jaime Lannister, along with a few of his cousins, thanks to Roose Bolton, who successfully performed a rearguard diversion and stalled Tywin's army. Upon his victory, Robb Stark holds council with his lords and bannermen, telling them of the word he's received of Ridley declaring himself king, securing the Reach, as well as Stannis amassing his own army at Dragonstone. With talks amongst the men on who to bend the knee to leads to no clear conclusion, it is with surprise that great Jon Umber speaks up. He speaks of his little care for Renly and Stannis, stating that there is only one true king he would follow, the king in the north. Other lords soon bend the knee, Karstarks, Boltons, even Theon, who takes to heart the declaration that he is Robb's brother if he was to do so now. The young wolf, Robb Stark, now king, moves south past the Riverlands and into Lannister territory, leaving his cousin Edmure to hold the territory and his uncle the Blackfish to begin raids on Lannister supply lines. Theon would question Robb's blind willingness to marriage, but after discussing the necessity, Robb would then broker a marriage deal between Theon and Alice Karstark. This would unite the second largest house in the north, as well as give Theon claim to the Iron Islands in the name of the Starks. Robb, still wanting to have the initiative, would send his mother Catelyn to speak with both Renly and Stannis to discuss terms for the North's independence. Lastly, Robb would send a letter to the Wall for Jon, telling him of his recent victories and his crowning. He would wish Jon good fortune as well as a second hidden letter. Robb would soon hear word of the Lannisters amassing a new army and make a daring move to take out the army before they can move on them. This move would come to fruition, for Robb, as in the late hours of night, would use his army to smash upon the sleeping Lannisters, causing a decisive defeat, killing thousands. With morning having come, Robb would examine the battlefield and come across a healer. She was beautiful, and with his attention being caught, Robb would assist her in working help on the Lannister soldier. She would express that her name is Jeyne, and after learning that the man she spoke to was in fact the king in the north, she would correct herself and inform him that her full name was Jeyne Westerling, a noble house from the Lannisters. After finishing her work, she would leave Robb, yet he would later summon her to his quarters that night, claiming that while she is a healer, she is still of nobility and would be treated as such. She would be given her own sleeping arrangements and would be taken care of, though he did inform her, for the time being, that she would remain a guest of his, as they were still at war. Over the coming weeks, the two would grow close, and eventually Robb would sleep with Jeyne. With many things going to plan, Robb grew confident in his war. His next plan was to be his most daring. With Robb on the doorsteps of Casterly Rock, he would lure Tywin into the Riverlands and come upon him on two sides, ending them once and for all. Yet Robb's hopes would be dashed. Word would reach him of Edmure having sallied out against the mountain and Tywin's army, forcing them to retreat back to Harrenhal. In a stroke of bad luck, Robb's plans were foiled. When he would return back to Riverrun, at the same time, his mother would also arrive. Robb would learn of Renly's death and how Stannis now marched upon King's Landing. Robb would scold Edmure for his folly, yet he would maintain blame for himself as he failed to speak of his plan with Edmure in the first place. Luckily, Tywin would still be put between a rock and a hard place, as Robb was still up front, and now Stannis was in his rear. Perhaps things could still go his way. However, that would just be the beginning of things to come. Catelyn, having been convinced by Littlefinger, would release Jaime Lannister in hopes to trade him for her daughters. This betrayal would rock Robb to his core. She had given away one of his main pieces of leverage. Word would soon spread of Catelyn's betrayal, and Lord Karstark, drunk on rage and grief after the loss of his son, will kill 3 of the young Lannister boys in the middle of the night. Robb, furious with this continued fracturing of his forces, as well as their betrayals, brought him much rage, and prepared to execute Lord Karstark. But Theon, as well as Jeyne Westerling, would talk him out of it. Robb was now unsure what to do. Tywin was out of reach. His army was pushing itself as they continued to fight in the south. His mother had betrayed him in a moment of grief, and the Karstarks were no longer reliable to keep their cool. Even Roose Bolton would bring word that the number of his forces acted on their own and were defeated by Lannister forces in the Stormlands. Finally, dark news arrived on Robb. The Iron Islands, led by the Greyjoys, had declared independence and had begun raids on the north. With everyone testing his trust in them, Robb broke and closed himself off. Jeyne Westerling would be his one confidant and comfort. The coming day afterwards, Robb would come to a decision. Robb would send Theon and the Karstarks ahead through the main roads to secure and stabilize the Riverlands, while he, along with his main force, would go back through the Twins and reach Moat Caitlin, where one of the larger Ironborn forces took up defenses. Along the road, back to the twins, Robb would speak to Lords Umber, Manderley, Clover, and Kerwin in private, before announcing to all of his lords and mother that Jeyne was pregnant and that he would marry her, making her his queen. Upon entering the twins, Robb and Walder would speak of Robb's decision to break their pact, but after offering the Freys a marriage between Edmure and one of Walder's daughters, an agreement would be met, and the wedding would be announced. In a fortnight there would be a ceremony, and afterwards war upon the Ironborn. Secretly unbeknownst to Robb, a scheme was afoot, one that would seek to end Robb's rebellion and rise of a new warden in the north. Stannis had lost the Battle of the Blackwater thanks to the Tyrell forces reinforcing Tywin's army and attacking his rear. With Renly dead and Stannis sent back to Dragonstone, the War of Five Kings was drawing to an end. Roose Bolton had begun to conspire with Tywin. Being promised the north, Roose had allied himself with Tywin to destroy a strong contingent of his forces, weakening Robb's army. He then was able to convince Walder Frey into joining their alliance. This would allow the Freys to take control of the Riverlands upon Robb's death. Lastly, with Littlefinger still seemingly under their control, he would take over the Vale in the name of House Lannister. All that was left to do now was to end Robb Stark and his lineage. This would happen at the wedding of Edmure Tully and Rosalind Frey. The stage was set, everything was in reach. Yet wildcard was still in play, one that none yet has seen. For many weeks, if not months now, Arya has traveled from King's Landing to the Riverlands. She had been under the watch of Sandor Clegane the Hound as both her captor and protector. However, with the war raging on, they were kept under close watch by Sir Beric Dondarrion and Thoros of Myr, two esteemed knights that had been tasked with capturing the mountain by Ned Stark before the war broke out. The pair now led a war party of roughly 100 men known as the Brotherhood Without Banners. Out of respect and loyalty to Ned Stark, Beric chose to help allow a smooth journey for Sandor and Arya, knowing Robb was headed for the twins, taking his company with him. With this development, and the time of the wedding drawing near, Edmure and Rosalind spoke their vows as Beric and company arrived at the twins. Thoros and Sandor both noticed how many of the Bolton troops formed most of the perimeter around the castle, with many of the Stark loyalists within the inner areas of the encampment. Stark troops drank and celebrated with the Freys, while Bolton men seemed to stand on guard. When stopped at the head of the encampment, they questioned on who they were by Bolton troops, but by luck they were approached by a friendly name. Small John Umber had been walking the campsite and noticed the host. When he asked who they were, Beric informed him of who he was and the person he brought. Lord Umber quickly ushered them to the castle. The party and the feast had begun to wind down. Edmure and Rosalind were carried away so that they could consummate their marriage. Brandon Tully the Blackfish had also slipped out of the Great Hall to relieve himself. Walder toasted to Robb for the marriage and the announcement of his child. With the party resuming, music began to play. None were the wiser, as the song chosen to play were the Rains of Castamere. That is, all except Catelyn. She alone recognized the omen. She then glanced at Roose, who eyed her down, glancing at his clothes, noticing his chainmail. Rising quickly, she called out to Robb. Suddenly, the great hall burst open before they could be sealed off. The whole room stops in silence as Small John Umber leads Sandor, Arya, Beric, and Thoros into the hall. This was a sudden development, but Walder had already given the command. 10 crossbowmen popped out from the rafters and quickly let loose a volley. 4 lesser lords were quickly shot down. Robb took a bolt into his shoulder and lower side, dropping him to the ground. With the sudden arrival of Beric and his company, the Frey and Bolton men were forced to divide themselves in an effort to kill the Starks. Arya watched as she saw Roose Bolton cut her mother's throat in front of her. Yet Catelyn smiled upon her death, seeing her daughter one last time. Great John Umber and Small John Umber used their strength and size to hoist 2 tables into the air to provide cover as Beric and Thoros ran to grab Robb and Jeyne. The Hound forces Roose to flee the room as he cuts down 3 of Walder's sons. Arya, noticing that no one was really keeping an eye on her, or even noticing her in a fit of anger, runs along the edge of the room. Drawing needle from her side, Arya runs up to Walder, who notices her too late as she plunged her blade into his heart. Her mother had been taken from her, and her brother might be dead, but she would have her revenge tonight. The Hound called for her. The Frey and Bolton men in the room had been slain, with many of the crossbowmen fleeing upon seeing their lord slain. Thoros and Beric took Robb, while Small John Umber guarded Jeyne. Arya stuck close to Thoros and Beric, with Sandor and Great John Umber covering their front and rear. As the group exited the main castle, they were in shock of the sight in which they saw. The Frey army was engaged with Robb forces throughout the encampment. Fires raged as the clashing of steel and iron rang throughout the echoes of men dying and killing each other. Luck was still on their side, though. With the Blackfish having initially left the room before the assassination attempt, he was able to rally a large contingent of Tully and Stark forces to form some resemblance of battle groups. Edmure himself had also fought his way from captivity and begun a counter-assault on the Frey turncoats. With the Brotherhood also being present in the battle, the three strong contingents were able to maintain resistance long enough for Roose to flee from the keep. With his plans foiled, Roose contemplated his choices and chose to take his army and flee back to the Dreadfort. Catelyn was dead, a number of lords slain. Robb himself was on death's doorstep from his wounds. The Freys would kill thousands of Robb's troops. With them killing each other, he could take his men north and secure a tight grip on the region. Either way, Robb Stark's reign as the King of the North was done. In the heat of battle, Arya was able to release Grey Wind. With the help of the Wolf and the lack of any true battle formations or competency, the Frey army was eventually cut down, with any survivors surrendering. The battle lasted most of the night. Robb's army was roughly 15,000 before the wedding and the previous night. By morning, he had barely 4,000. Theon and the Karstarks had marched ahead with 3,000. The Boltons made up nearly 5,000 themselves, meaning almost another 3,000 were either wounded or killed by the Frey army, which totaled almost the same size as Robb's without the Freys. The saving grace for the Northerners was the battle experience and the fact that Roose was forced to flee or face the wrath of the Hound. Arya reached Robb's tent and saw a great number had gathered. Jeyne Westerling, Greatjon Umber, Sandor, Thoros, and Beric. Nearby, the body of Catelyn had been retrieved, and her corpse laid on a bed. Rosalind sat near her, with Edmure standing by. Lords Cerwyn, Manderly, Glover, Umber, and the Blackfish were out securing the surrounding battlegrounds. Much talk was spoken on what to do, and finally it was decided. Thoros would use the blessing of the Fire Kiss on Robb and return him to life with Beric's life force. Many questioned if it would happen or even work, but after the rite was done and Beric passed away, Robb shortly woke from his slumber. Many grieved the losses. Robb and Arya buried the mother that following night. Fortunately for Robb, while they may have survived the night, he realized that Theon, who had been sent to push out Ironborn raiders, would not know of the treachery that transpired. While they would send ravens and riders, it would be much too late. Roose Bolton's bastard son, Ramsay, and a contingent of men would not only secure Mill Catelyn, but would also assassinate Theon and slay Lord Karstark in the process, burning many of the Karstark troops alive in their sleep. Knowing now that Winterfell was now in grave danger of being taken, Robb would have no choice but continue moving north. Robb must save his home and family. He would leave the twins in control by Edmure, who he named the new lord of the castle, as well as send the Blackfish back to hold River Run. From there, the Northern army would march to meet the Boltons and root them out of the North root and stem. His greatest strength now going for him being that Roose Bolton will now surely believe he had died, and with his death, the end of the Stark army. And that is where I'm going to leave this story today. So if you guys haven't noticed, so this is actually a re-upload. I decided to redo the audio and really just make it more clean. I did a lot of recording and re-editing, and I just wanted to give you guys a better quality video to start off the main storyline, as it had been a few months and I felt I was now comfortable to do such a thing. But yeah, by the time this video goes up, the finale of the Robb Stark fanfiction should also be up. So I hope you guys give it a check. If you like this video, like this story, want to see and hear more, go ahead and leave a like, subscribe, and hit the bell. You guys have a good one. See ya.